In March 2013, exactly one day after Xi Jinping was inaugurated as president, China Central Television aired its annual Consumer Day broadcast. This is a massive, nationally televised segment watched by millions, where the state publicly calls out corporations for poor treatment of customers. That year, the target was Apple. The state broadcaster accused the company of treating Chinese consumers as second-class citizens, specifically claiming that Apple repaired broken iPhones with refurbished parts rather than entirely new ones. Back in Cupertino, executives were mostly confused. Their warranty policies were virtually identical worldwide. Assuming it was a simple misunderstanding, Apple denied the claims and publicly boasted that they provided an incomparable user experience. Cupertino was soon victim to a coordinated digital blitzkrieg. State-backed media mouthpieces engaged in a multi-week attack, with front-page editorials demanding the country strike down Apple's arrogance and threatening severe repercussions. This chart shows the immediate impact of that media campaign. In the quarter before the broadcast, Apple's sales in Greater China were growing at 67%. Within weeks, that growth plummeted to just 8%. This coordinated attack proved a terrifying reality. The Chinese state could weaponize Apple's own massive consumer base against them at a moment's notice. Despite building a multi-billion-dollar operation across the country, Apple employed absolutely no senior executives in China. They had no coordinated government strategy and no one to manage political affairs. This reveals a massive strategic gap. How did the world's most powerful tech company hand absolute leverage over its survival to a foreign authoritarian government? To understand the trap Apple is in today, we have to rewind to 1996. The company was in a financial death spiral. They announced a $700 million quarterly loss, the largest in their history, and leadership was quietly exploring bankruptcy options. Up until this crisis, Apple's corporate identity was deeply tied to building its own computers. They operated major in-house factories in places like Colorado and California. But by the mid-90s, cash reserves had shrunk to dangerously low levels. The company was sitting on nearly $1 billion of unsold inventory, and $150 million in loans were coming due. The situation was so dire that an Apple executive negotiating the sale of their Fountain, Colorado factory received a late-night phone call with a blunt ultimatum: sign the deal with an outside contract manufacturer immediately, or the entire company would miss payroll on Thursday. To survive the 90s, Apple was forced to abandon its domestic manufacturing ethos and place its physical production entirely in the hands of overseas contractors. Apple eventually shifted its production to Asia, finding an optimal mix of cheap, flexible labor and relaxed regulations. This move was largely orchestrated by Taiwanese contract manufacturing giants, most notably Foxconn. In reality, Apple's involvement was much deeper than simple outsourcing. They deployed armies of top U.S. engineers, designers, and supply chain specialists to these factory floors to strictly coordinate and teach production techniques. This was Chinification, a system where Apple financed and mentored these facilities to drive a massive transfer of technical know-how into a new global manufacturing hub. This chart compares Apple's spending in China against U.S. industrial policy. The CHIPS Act allocates $52 billion over 4 years, while Apple's investment in China hit $55 billion in a single year. Furthermore, Apple has trained 28 million workers, a labor force larger than California's. Apple bankrolled and staffed a rival nation's modern industrial revolution, moving far beyond this simple act of renting assembly line space. Over time, Beijing leveraged this investment. They subsidized domestic manufacturers to absorb Apple's training, creating a powerful network known as the Red Supply Chain. These state-backed Chinese entities are now systematically pushing out Apple's original American and Taiwanese partners, winning massive contracts to build internal iPhone components. The strategic intent is clear. Beijing used Apple's operation to extract foreign engineering expertise until domestic companies were ready to take over the lines. In a strange turn of events, the very infrastructure Apple painstakingly built to achieve its corporate wealth is now actively controlled by the Chinese government. Today, Apple pulls in record global revenues and runs a highly lucrative software services business. Yet, operationally, the company is a captive entity. This chart illustrates the difficulty of Apple's recent attempts to move assembly to countries like Vietnam and India. As the arrows show, those factories remain entirely dependent on a central supply chain hub in mainland China for essential components. To protect this irreplaceable hardware pipeline, Apple has little choice but to quietly comply with Beijing's draconian censorship and surveillance demands. To maintain their market access, Apple has banned thousands of apps in the country, including the New York Times. They have disabled VPNs, tools to bypass government firewalls, and they have agreed to house Chinese user data on state-monitored servers. The aggressive outsourcing strategy that rescued Apple from bankruptcy in 1996 achieved its financial goal, but it ultimately cost the company its independence, binding its future entirely to the whims of America's greatest geopolitical rival.